listen. Oh yeah. I already told them about this brother. Oh yeah. Hey, what's up, family? Hope and pray everybody is well. Listen, welcome to tonight's town hall. I am so glad to be here amongst greatness. First and foremost, I want to introduce our honor, I should say, our senior pastor, Dr. Leonzo Lynch. Let's show him some love. Come on, social media. People in the house, amen. God bless you. God bless you. You know, me, I'm always the one yelling in the microphone because I'm from the country. Can't help myself. Pastor Walt, God bless you. Let's show me some love. Clap, 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 clap. All right. And certainly we certainly are blessed tonight to have one of our community leaders and one of our community leaders in the most challenging times in our nation. I would just like to present to some and introduce to others our very own police chief, Brother Johnny Jenkins. Let's show some love. Jennings, I'm sorry, I always do that. Chief Jennings, amen, amen. Listen, so again, because we only have 1 power hour and we're going to jump right in tonight, this is our format. I'm just going to ask Chief a few questions based on some things that you have asked me about. So many of you submitted questions, and then also we'll have a chance to take questions from individuals that are here live. So we thank you guys for pushing your way live. It's always better to talk to people than to talk to chairs. So we appreciate you. But we'll ask a few questions, and certainly toward the end, we'll save time for some Q&A. And Chief Jennings blessed us by going to hang out with the kids that are in Vacation Bible School. So he hung out and talked to them for a few minutes. We didn't have time to get to all of the classes, but he was able to hang out with a couple. All right. So without any further ado, my brother, thank you, sir, for being with us tonight.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate it.
All right. Listen, we promise to take it easy on you, and we won't have a good time. I feel we're a church that truly believes in the call to be a part of the community and to serve in the community. And if we have one objective today, it is to know how we as a faith community can work together as it relates to all of the things we want to do to make Charlotte a safer place, all of the things we want to do to make the relationships between law enforcement and citizens better. We want to make sure that today we kind of talk about that, and getting to know you is part of how we're going to do that. So my first question for you, before we get into the police stuff, I just want people to get to know you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where you from, Chief?
No, I appreciate that question. I rarely get tell us about who you are, so I try to throw that in anytime I get an opportunity. So I'm originally from, I moved around as a kid. My dad was in the Army, 21 years in the Army. He retired, and we settled in Tennessee, where basically I grew up in a small town called Jefferson City, Tennessee. And throughout, had a great childhood, great experience, great small town experience growing up. Went to school at Appalachian State University, where I played football and went to school up there. And after I retired, or after I graduated, didn't really have a plan. And I was wondering, what's next for me? And I had a lot of people tell me that Charlotte was an up-and-coming place for young adults who are looking for careers. And people are surprised when I say this. I moved to Charlotte without a job. And luckily, I landed a job in a couple of weeks because I was running out of money very quickly. And so I ended up working in a group home, with troubled youth. And that experience was something that I was really unexpected and unprepared for, from where I grew up to what I was seeing. So a friend of mine eventually talked me into applying for the police department, and never wanted to be a police officer, never thought about being a police officer. Even though my major was in criminal justice, I wanted to be a postal inspector. And when they started calling me after I applied, I started doing my research, and I said, I want to know what they're all about before I just agree to be a police officer. And the more I learned about what the profession was, the more I was interested. to the point to where I became excited about becoming a police officer and getting through the academy. So it was a different path and journey for me. I do believe that it was a calling, even though the calling wasn't a direct calling for me to be a police officer. I realized very early on that this was what I was meant to do.
Chief, that's very powerful. As many of my friends and family know, I had an opportunity to serve with CMPD for about 7 years, and it's tough. It absolutely is a calling. So I thank you for your service. But
you can come back now. We got some vacancies.
Well, you know, my right knee ain't what it used to be, you know. I keep telling myself I'm great, but I've discovered I'm a shell of a man that I used to be.
you did a great job for us all the way around, even on the attorney side. And
thank you, sir.
So we appreciate you.
Yeah, sir. Chief, you skipped over something that's very important. Now, some of you may not know, he said he played football, but I said I played football, and, you know, I got in the fourth quarter when the score was lopsided, but Chief Johnny Jennings played football, and I believe it was in 2020. Is it true that you were selected to the App State Hall of Fame?
I was in 2010.
2010.
I was inducted into their Hall of Fame. I played linebacker at Appalachian State, and actually just hosted the team at CMPD to give them what we call a cops and cleats, to give them a police experience, to kind of get to know who we are, and we could get to know them as well. So that was an honor today to have the entire team and all their coaching staff at our police training academy today.
Oh, that's great. Did they enjoy that?
Oh, they had a ball. We gave them a lot of different things, hands-on opportunities to do things now, they didn't get to drive, but they got to ride real fast in cars, and got to go through some simulation machines and everything. So they even took some dog bites with the collar on their arm, so it didn't hurt them. But they had a good time. We really accomplished what we wanted to do to make sure that they get to know who we are. Athletes have a very strong voice, as you know, that we want to make sure that they're informed and educated on who we are as a profession.
Well, let me ask you this. When you had your opportunity to hang out with those young men, I imagine that probably the majority of them were probably African American. Is that a safe assumption?
It is a safe assumption.
So
yes.
how was that, right? In light of everything that's going on, were they open up first? How was that?
Oh, unbelievable. Their interaction with us, start to finish, they didn't hold back any questions. No matter how tough they thought it was, they asked us the tough questions. And they were very receptive to the answers. Even the coaches, after a while, a lot of them, after it was over, said, wow, I had no idea what this job entailed. I had no idea how tough it was. And it opened and enlightened them a little bit. So that's really the goal. You can still have your opinion of who we are as a profession, but at least at this point, they have taken steps to be educated in who we are. So.
Well, that's great. And let me ask you this. Are there other opportunities for citizens to be educated as it relates to, law enforcement and things of that nature?
Yeah, we do. We have what's called a Citizens Academy, which we are able to bring our citizens through training similar to what our officers see. And that's also on our website at cmpd.org. Or if you don't have this My CMPD app, you can go on there and find out all about it and get more information about our Citizens Academy as well.
That's great. Yeah. So, Chief, a little bit more background before we get into the main event, if you will, and some of the more challenging questions.
All right.
How long have you been with CMPD now?
Wow, I just passed the 29-year mark. I'm working on my 30th year now.
All right, that's great. Congratulations on that. And I guess you just kind of walked your way through the ranks. Is that correct?
I did, and that's the thing that makes me most proud. Is I started my career with CMPD, and I will be finishing my career with CMPD. But started as a patrol officer, had some special assignments, became a homicide detective, sergeant, and went through people ask me about what positions I've held within the department, and I just say it's a lot easier just to say what I haven't done within the department, because I've done about everything at different ranks and levels.
Right, and does that help you to kind of understand some of the things and some of the situations that officers have to deal with on a daily basis?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the experience if you're going to sit in a leadership role in our department, the more diverse you are with your experiences through the department is going to make you a stronger leader. And I think I've been blessed to be able to move around and take on different positions and get a full experience of our agency.
That's great. Dr. Lynch, before I go on to some of the main meat and potatoes here, was there anything you wanted to ask Chief about at this point?
First of all, welcome. Thank you for taking out your time to come and to be with us here tonight in person and also virtually. One question I have is, from your perspective, having come up through the ranks, what are some practical things the local church can do to better support the department and the individual officers?
You know, I think that that's a great question because I get that all the time. And I think things like we're doing right now, invite our officers, invite them in. It doesn't have to always be me sitting up in front and talking and engaging, but there are ways that we can, every church in their jurisdiction should know who that division captain is. So that division captain you should know them by name. And we have opportunities that other churches have taken us up on. For instance, we'll do a community roll call, what's called a community roll call, where churches, businesses, neighborhoods, apartment complexes, they'll call and they'll say, hey, why don't you do your roll call out at our facility? And then you bring your congregation in, or you invite people in to get to know who those officers are, see how they start their shift. When they are getting ready to leave, some churches have had the pastors there that offer prayer before they go on their shift. Some have fed the officers before they go out. But a lot of it is also mingling to get to know who they are, because each interaction that we have with an individual, too often it's on the very worst day of that person's life. It doesn't have to be that way. We can have interactions in a peaceful setting that doesn't necessarily that you don't need us, but you want to see us and get to know us. And so the church has a very powerful voice that can reach out to more people than we can ever reach out to. So when we highlight those positive things, I think that goes quite a long way. So
that's great, Chief. I appreciate that. I think we're certainly going to have to take up that community roll call. And for those that may not be familiar with that lingo, if you don't watch those cop shows, that's that moment when you check in, if you will, and certainly you want to make sure that all of your equipment is squared away. But that's that moment when you come in and you hear about what's going on in the community. I'll never ever forget, Chief, one night going to roll call in Freedom, left on Wednesday night with a domestic violence situation, and I'll never forget me and one of my buddies. We kept telling her all about all the resources for domestic violence and stuff, and she was like, "I'm fine. He just always gets upset like this." And I remember coming in the roll call, and they were saying that she was the person in our division that had been killed. Oh, wow. And I was just like, wow. I just never forget that moment. So yeah. I just never know what you walk into on that shift, what problem you may have to solve. And so that would be awesome to be able to have some officers here, pray with them. And like you said, more importantly, just get to know them as humans on a day other than the worst day of your life. So that's
and you hit on a very good point, because you see that when we go through that, officers go from call to call to call, and one thing I don't want them to do, and I'm trying to make sure they do, we'll talk about later, is that they don't bring their last call to their next call, and you don't become callous to people's situations and dealing with the individuals that you come in contact with.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. No, that's real, and I hope that we can help officers. Because absolutely, I certainly remember going to talk to that young man over there one time after a homicide on Freedom. Mm-hmm. And my problem was this, Chief. Nobody did anything disrespectful, but it had become normal. Yeah. Like, this was a young brother about 18 years old, got shot after the club let out type of situation. And we were standing there. It was raining, so we had the tent up over the young brother. And we were talking about sports, and I just said, when did it become normal for me that this guy's, just been killed in the streets, and it's part of the job. And like you said, if I wasn't able to talk to somebody, it absolutely would have had an impact. Because I'm like, I don't like how I'm feeling. I'm just like, this is normal. And I was like, this wasn't my normal before I took this job,
Yeah. When it becomes normal, that's when you really you have to really take a deep look. And what keeps me up at night, and very early on in my career as the chief, I found myself standing over dead bodies of 15, 16-year-olds. And then what compiles that and makes it worse is when you find out that the person who pulled the trigger is 15 and 16 years old. So 2 young lives that are just gone, that are lost, and scarred forever because they couldn't handle disputes in a more appropriate way.
Thank you, Chief. All right, Chief, this is where I'm gonna grab the steering wheel and take a hard right.
Hey, let's do it, yeah.
Folks don't like the police no more, Chief.
Is that true?
Well, seriously, we try to keep it light so we can have honest conversations.
Yeah.
But seriously, in a time such as this, across the nation, I think we would all agree that this is probably one of the more challenging times as it relates to community relations. We've had, protests probably perhaps like none of us have probably seen in our lifetime, unless it was maybe the 60s or something like that, if you were alive. I understand from talking to officers who I'm still friends with and reading that morale is at an all-time low. I understand that there are vacancies at large departments across the nation, and I understand that there's a lot going on. And so while I gave you several points, and you feel free to jump on any one of those, I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on the current climate as it relates to policing?
Certainly one thing, first and foremost, I certainly understand. And when we're in a society now to where we have to have instant information, everything has to be put out right away because of social media and because of technology that we have today. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we're as transparent as quickly as we can. Oftentimes we're not in control of that, particularly with body-worn camera releases and things like that. But I also, in my love of the profession, and I know in what I see, is the great work that our men and women in uniform do every day. We hear all the times the things that we don't do. We don't do de-escalation. We don't settle situations down. And I'd sit there and if I had hair, I'd pull it out because we do it every day. It just doesn't make the news. It's not newsworthy. I tell you, just a few months ago, we had 4 SWAT call-outs, and one of them involved a suspect that was shooting at officers when they arrived at the door, and then started shooting at other officers as they came to the scene. We were able to de-escalate that situation, get that person out of there with no injuries whatsoever. Thank God our officers were okay and the suspect was okay. And then we had a couple of the other 3 involved handguns where the person was shooting at other people, and same thing. So those are the things that people don't get to see, and those are the things that unfortunately what sells and what it brings most to the interest are the bad parts of the job and the things that you see in social media. And we're at a point now in this profession that it's no longer I worry about what we do as CMPD. I have to worry about what people do, what other officers do across the country. And nobody gets more upset than an officer when you see someone who tarnishes that badge and steps out of the lines of what we're sworn to do to protect and uphold the law. And when we see somebody step out of that, it's very painful, and it's something that as a police profession that affects us all across the country.
Dr. Lynch, you went down to Elizabethtown, is that correct? For the recent, can you talk a little bit about what you saw and maybe ask the chief a question about protests?
Yes, we were able to travel a few weeks ago to the coast, to Elizabeth City.
Thank you.
A clergy rally, interfaith, Virginia and North Carolina came together to march on a Saturday morning trying to get answers concerning the death of a young man that was shot in the back of the head, SWAT team in a neighborhood, shooting in a school district, shot in other houses. When we, I believe his name was Anthony Brown. When we were able to get there and the more I learned about the incident, part of the problem has been the lack of communication between the department, the public, and the family. As we're looking at our county and our city, what are some of your goals in terms of how to be transparent? As you mentioned, we have instant information, but we do realize we have to have a way to communicate. What are some ways we can establish good communication between law enforcement and the community?
Yeah, that's great, and it's the difficulty is with us. We have to make sure that we're communicating with the people who are gonna get that message out. So we had I was very proud of the situation recently where we had an officer-involved shooting where the person was shooting at our officers and we returned fire and injured the individual. The false narrative that came out was that we shot the person in the back. He was running away, didn't have a firearm. We were able to quickly, through our own social media outlets and through the media, we put that stuff out right away because we saw back in the Keith Lamont Scott shooting where there was a lot of information going out and we didn't say anything. We didn't tell people that there was a gun on the scene, that he had a gun. So the narrative of him reading a book and that's what he had in his hand, it flew amongst the community, and we had no rebuttal to that. And by the time we did, it was too late. It had escalated. So either way, we have to make sure, and we started immediately at that point saying, we're going to put that information out. And one thing that I am proud of is that I had some activists within the community that we can talk to directly. Some of them were walking into meetings and saying, we want to hear directly from you. And for them to trust in me to call, to say that we're going to talk to our people and we're going to tell them what you said and give them some facts of the case and that they actually believe that it's facts of the case. So because they're hearing it from me, the trust that they have in me to do that, whether they like law enforcement or not, or believe in us or not, the wherewithal to say, I'm going to call the chief and I'm going to talk to him directly, to be able to have that communication. And then I know when I give that communication, it's spreading out to all of the people that they see as that see them as leaders in the community. And that's very important to me to be able to do that.
And I agree with that as a pastor and a leader in our state denomination. I currently serve as president of our General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. So we have churches across the 100 counties, about 1,600 churches, about 500,000 members. One of the things I'm learning and talking with local activists statewide is they would like that communication. I've not heard anyone say that all police are bad. We know it's individuals. But what they're trying to find out is when a crisis happens in a community, how can we be assured we're getting accurate information and truthful information in a timely fashion? So I have a follow-up question. I do not fully understand and know what happens with what is called body cam footage.
Yeah.
When something happens, how soon does that go out? How much does that go out? And how does all of that work?
Yeah, so that's the most difficult thing for people to understand. And I actually spoke about this. That was one of the questions from the football team today from Appalachian State, that what it's difficult for people to understand. In North Carolina, state law prohibits me from releasing body-worn camera footage. A lot of these incidents that, as long as they don't hinder the investigation, I want to put them out right away. I think that we're better to deal with stuff up front, whether it's good or bad. Let's get it out. Let's be transparent. However, a Superior Court judge is required to sign off on the release of any of the footage. And what also is difficult for people to kind of understand as well is that we may have hours and hours and hours of video footage because you might be talking about a response of 20 officers going to an officer-involved shooting. Every one of those every piece of that video has to be viewed by the judge. So just imagine that the judge has to sit and watch hours and hours of video to make a decision on whether to release it. That doesn't happen in a day. And when the judge makes the decision to release it, and I think in Elizabeth City, the judge actually made the decision not to release it. So we're totally dependent on the court system on whether that body-worn camera footage gets released or not. It is stored on our servers, and it's uploaded right away as soon as that officer's shift is over. They plug their body-worn camera in, and it uploads into a server or in the cloud, and that footage is saved at that point. So.
That's great. Thanks. No, that was a perfect question, Doc. That's where I was certainly want to ask about that to help kind of understand how it works here in North Carolina. Chief, there's also a lot of conversation as it relates to, we're hearing two phrases recently that kind of are trending, I guess you could say. One being police reform, and the other being defund the police.
Yes.
So well, I'll just do it this way. What are your thoughts? Let's talk about those two bullets briefly.
All right, great. So police reform, I think every police chief, and I've talked to my colleagues and major city chiefs across the country, they know and we know. There's not a chief that I've talked to that feels like we have to keep doing the same thing we've been doing. Every one of them, we're all scrambling trying to say, what are some new concepts that we can put into place? What are some things that we can do to change the culture of law enforcement? And you know, one of the things that I feel like is important to make our department successful is community collaboration, where you know we have to stop and listen. And I tell our officers, we get our authority and our policing powers come from our citizens. Our citizens should have some say in how we do that. And so we've been doing some work within the division commanders to make sure that we're putting forth community collaboration with different things. That I could go all day on it. I don't want to bore you with it, but there are things that we have in place that we bring to community and we tailor those responses. And when you talk about defund police, that's kind of a very sensitive topic with me because you have to see what defunding the police means. A lot of people think, let's just take their budget. And that's what, I don't think originally that's what it was put in place for at all. It was to look at how do we reallocate some of those funds that are going, and that's what we're doing within the CMPD, is what are some things that we are responding to, or things that we have sworn positions to that we don't necessarily need a gun and a badge doing that job. And we've identified our first go around, we've identified several jobs that we are going to say we're going to civilianize, is how we call it. So non-sworn police officers will be doing those jobs, and then we have basically swapped that out, those positions out with sworn positions, and now they're going to be non-sworn positions. And there's also more to come, particularly like dealing with mental health calls for services that are low priority, homelessness calls for service that might not be a high priority and maybe not need a police officer there. So defund the police in a sense of reallocating funds, but still be able to serve the citizens that we need to serve out there. However, the sensitive part to me is I saw a lot of agencies across the country arbitrarily just cut funding and just say, I'm taking 10% of your budget. So some of my colleagues across the country had to lay officers off or cut certain specialized assignments that were doing really good work just for the fact of we're going to do something to you because of what's going on across the country. So they just cut police funding, and it was irresponsible in my opinion.
Wow, that's great. I want to throw a curveball at you. All right. It was about a week ago that we were reflecting on I don't even actually think it's been a week, a couple of days, reflecting on Juneteenth across the nation. As many of us are aware, it was Juneteenth celebration 2020, in which we had what some would classify as a mass shooting incident on Baitys Ford Road in Charlotte. And one of the stories I saw recently was that, at this time there have still been no arrests made, and there are no known suspects. For anybody in the community that has concerns about something like that happening, what are your thoughts about that whole incident and things of that nature? I know it's still an open investigation, so I certainly know you can only say so much, but
yeah,
just like to hear whatever you can share.
No, that's good. And actually today is the anniversary of that shooting, and that 4 people tragically lost their lives. And if you remember, that was right in the midst of a lot of the protests that we had, a lot of the criticism about how policing handled the protest, and it was ironic to me because at one point the way we handled protests and break-up crowds that we saw that were committing violent acts and throwing things at officers and things that were getting unruly, but then at this hand we allowed that celebration to continue. So the criticism was that we didn't go in and do anything, and what I tell people is, you look at the amount of people that had firearms in that crowd. What is it, 180 something rounds, I believe, is what we counted that was fired that night. Imagine if police would have gone in and those rounds would have been back and forth with our officers, and how tragic, even more tragic, that could have been with crossfire. So we have to really be careful about how we interact and escalate a situation, because we made a conscious decision that we would simply not engage with what was going on because of the climate and because of what could have happened. Not that we knew there were firearms out there, but when that occurred, with the amount of people that were out there, I fully expected that we would solve that case in a couple of days. We had 0 people come forward and tell us what they might have seen out there or help us with that investigation. Yet we hear third hand on the streets about who's involved and what might have happened, but we can't arrest somebody on that. So what I will tell you is there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle that we were able to put together. We just can't complete that puzzle until we can get to a point to where we can say there's probable cause to arrest this individual, and we're going to go out and do that. So it's unfortunate. You had 4 people lose their lives. I think it was a total of 9 that were injured, and it's one of those things that to this day still frustrates me, because there's some people that are out there that don't need to be on the streets preying on our citizens, because it was such a ruthless act. It wasn't an accidental shooting. It wasn't something that the people that took these guns out deliberately fired into crowds at people, and if they didn't know that they were likely to kill people, then I would never understand that. So we're going to continue to work that case. We still do, and we still need information on it.
Chief, thank you. I was reading something yesterday in regards to that case, and they counter-argued and stated that, well, if the relationship between law enforcement and the community was better, the community would feel more comfortable talking to police. How you feel about that? Do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts about it? I don't know if it's like we don't trust the police, so we're not going to talk to the police.
I think there's really a misconception that we don't have good relationships out there, and I'll tell you, I listen to sides like that say that, but then when I go out into communities and when I talk to people, I hear otherwise. And there are a lot of people. There's a majority, I think, of people that don't talk about the good things encounters that they have with officers. But as we look at the perception, it becomes reality. So when there are people that feel like that they can't trust us, that we are the bad guys, so to speak, then we have to pay attention to that, and we have to figure out how do we counter that and how do we prove otherwise. So we have to continue to get our message out and continue to work hard to build those relationships. So, we got a long way to go, and I think that's not set just in Charlotte, but that's across the country.
Great. In a second, I want to take a question from someone from our crowd. So if anyone that is sitting with us would like to ask a question, please go ahead and make your way to the microphone at this time because we want to keep it flowing since we are streaming live. So you're more than welcome to make your way to the question. But as people, to the mic, thank you. As people are making their way to the microphone to, talk to you, Chief, let me ask you this. When were you sworn in as Chief of Police?
It was July 1st of 2020, so I'm coming up on that first year.
Okay, and as chief, how many protests of any nature have you dealt with since July of 2020?
Since July of 2020, not a whole lot. I'm trying to think of because the major protests that we saw were really May and June.
Okay.
And then as July came around, they started to taper off some. So we have protests all the time, and I'll tell you, there's a difference between the protests where they're what we consider riot activity, where they're damaging property, committing crimes, but on a weekly basis there are protests in Charlotte, and the majority of those, if not all of them here lately, have been very peaceful. People come out and we facilitate them to have their voices heard. They stay on their schedules. They don't go outside the boundaries of the law, and then they go home. So when you start talking about how many protests, it's probably countless, but that I've dealt with. But it's probably the ones that have erupted where we've had to take enforcement action. I don't think there have been but maybe one or two since last July.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. Yes, ma'am. You just walk right up to the mic.
Yeah.
All right.
I did, because I wanted to ask, how are you listening?
Talking to the mic.
I wanted to ask a two-part question, if that's okay. You discussed mental health. You discussed mental health. What are the initiatives like in place to start recognizing the fact that some of the situations where officers arrive to where people might be experiencing mental health crises, what is being done to make sure that an officer who might not be trained in mental health is able to de-escalate that situation without injuring somebody who's already troubled?
Yes. So that's a great question, because in Mecklenburg, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department over the past few years have been very intentional about training our officers in crisis intervention. Crisis intervention is not just an 8-hour class that officers go and take. Crisis intervention is a 40-hour class, and if you can imagine trying to train 1,800 police officers and take them off the streets for an entire week of training, but we felt it important enough that we incentivize officers doing that training. So we have about 800 officers that are trained in crisis intervention. And that number is continuing to grow. We unfortunately we had to pause because of COVID last year with the training, but as we've picked it back up, that number is going to continue to grow. We also have what's called Community Policing Crisis Response Team, our CPCRT team. We have a total of 6 teams of that right now, which we have plans in place to double that by the end of the year, and that involves a police officer paired with a clinician who can deal with those people who might have mental health issues or mental health crisis, that they not only are able to go to those calls for service, but they follow up so that we're not having repeated calls for that. And lastly, we've just completed a study from Safe Communities that came out of the Safe Communities Committee, the recommendation to look at low priority calls for service that deal with mental health that we don't necessarily, we should not be going to. I think there's a lot asked of police that we just naturally have inherited, but if you really take a look at it, why are police going to a call about someone who's homeless? Why are police going to a call about someone who won't take their medication? That should not be us having to deal with, because as you said, those situations can escalate very quickly.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
And then my second question was, and I agree there's great officers in Charlotte. I've encountered some myself. I have a 24-year-old and a 19-year-old, so things happen in life. But what is being done to deal with the realistic part of, there is some racial profiling in CMPD, I believe, and I don't know everybody's situation directly, but I just know it through sight and what I can see. I moved to this area of town now, but I used to live on Albemarle Road, predominantly low poverty area, African American predominantly community, and I work in Ballantyne, which is almost the opposite. And I've seen plenty of times, 6 to 7 officers show up for one person versus in the Ballantyne community, maybe one during a traffic incident. So, I mean, is that even recognized or?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we have to look at is we go through an extensive cultural competency training, implicit bias training, but it's just that, and that's what we have to kind of get past. We keep talking about training. Well, when I hear training, we're sending officers in a classroom for 8 hours. They leave, and what's different? Other than giving them some information, they leave and walk out. We have to get into the point of education. Everyone has implicit biases. We have to learn to recognize what those are, and we have to make sure that they're not influencing how we react to our community. So we're not going to change this overnight. We recognize that we look at things differently in different communities. And officers, one, we have to make sure we're getting the right people in. We only hire about 4% of people that even apply. We want to make sure that the people that we bring in have experienced through diversity, that they've had life experiences, that they've been able to interact with people that don't look like them. And once we can see that, we've turned people down and said, go get some additional life experience, come back and apply later, and we look at that. But yeah, the answer to your question is yes, we do see that that's an issue. It's a difficult one to solve. Personally, I don't think you can solve it through let's just go and send an officer in a classroom and then think that behavior is going to change just like that. We have to change the culture and the expectations that we have of officers. And then when officers step out of bounds, we have to be able to hold them accountable, which is another one of my core four is professional accountability, that we have to hold each other accountable when we step out of that line.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Chief, for being here. Personally, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
My first question is, I have two also. My first question is, we hear the word comply a lot of times when an officer arrives. Give me your definition, or how should comply be done? Compliance.
Yes, so the word comply is a very strong word that people have a lot of issues with. I like to say cooperate, cooperation. And when an officer is giving instructions, those instructions are given for the safety of the officer and the safety of the individual that they're in contact with. So if I go and say, sir, can you put your hands on the steering wheel? That's to say that's what's going to make me feel safer during my interaction with that individual. But when you say comply, and understand why some people feel like, well, comply, why do I have to comply with an officer? The bottom line is, and whether we like it or not, the officer is an authority figure. That officer should make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep both sides safe and everyone around safe. And sometimes if that comes across as you will comply or you will, that's what I'm hoping it doesn't do. We have to have better interactions from start to finish with the people that we come in contact with. So it's a good concept. Sometimes people hear me say it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. And I think we can do a better job in that aspect when we ask people to do things that we need them to do to keep us safe and to keep themselves safe.
The other question is, since there's so much racial tension throughout the nation, do you feel that it would help if we had more young men, when I say young men, more black young men to apply to be officers?
Absolutely. Great point, great question. It doesn't even need an answer, but you're exactly right that right now we serve about 34% African Americans within our jurisdiction. We only have about 17% African American officers. Same with the Latino community, about 12 or 13% that we serve in our community, but we only have about 6 or 7% Latino officers. We have to be able to mirror the community that we serve, and we're making huge efforts to try and do that. Imagine the difficulty, though, is the vilification that you see with policing. As a young black man, it's very difficult to get someone to say, I want to be a police officer. And we have to be able to invite them in, just like I did with the football team today, get them to get to know who we are and understand that your opinion of law enforcement should not be what you see on social media or what you see on TV. There's a whole lot more to it than what you see, and that's what we have to make sure we do. Hello.
Thank you for being here. As a product from Philadelphia, being here about 2 years, thank you for hosting this. The question I have is this. I'm a retired from the Philadelphia School District, and when you talk about 15 and 16-year-olds going out, and that's having a lot of the problems and a lot of the homicides, I want to know from your district, what are some of the things that you do as far as as far as going out to the schools and doing, different things to try to let the young people know that they can feel comfortable talking to a police officer. When I taught in preschool, we used to have what we called officer friendly. And we started at a very young age, at 3 years old, letting the children know that they don't have to be afraid of police officers. And so I just wanted to know from your perspective, what are some of the things that you do to incorporate that in the school system?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is we have SROs in every high school in Mecklenburg County, and also some of the middle schools. And that's what it worried me when I started hearing the talks about taking police out of the schools. And you saw some place jurisdictions do it in other states, because that relationship is very necessary. And I'm not going to sit and say that every SRO in every school does just an outstanding job with building those relationships. Some SROs are spending a lot of their time doing law enforcement, which is unfortunate. But the importance of having those in the school is for the reason that you talked about, to have that contact and to build those relationships. I have many SROs that, as adults, people come back and say, that was my SRO, and had positive encounters. We also have about 40 youth programs that we do within Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. And what was interesting last year is I found myself having to defend those youth programs that we're doing, and the question of funding for those youth programs. And a lot of people were shocked to see how little money out of the operating budget is actually spent on youth programs. We go out and seek grants, and we get federal funding and private funding to help us put these programs on that are much needed. And then lastly, some of the things that I've seen here recently is the amount of grassroots organizations that are out there that are helping our youth is just incredible. And I had no idea until we started a lot of this violence interrupters programs and corridors of opportunity that you saw the city and the county take responsibility for. But it's very encouraging to see that, but it's still not enough.
Thank you.
Once again, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Chief. I look at this maybe in two very short, simple questions. In dealing with the law and the complexity of it, you have two sides to it. There's an officer who is trained, who has fear. There's a person who has violated the law, who's in fear. The two now converge. The one that's in authority is fearful, and the one who's being detained is fearful. And the situation, instead of it de-escalating, becomes escalated. And the question is, what is really being done to ensure that when an event is taking place, that the proper assessment is being done when that person really does not have a weapon, but the fear factor of one is greater than the fear factor of another, and the person that is resisting arrest, to me, is not resisting arrest, he is resisting death, and it looks like he's fighting for his life because he's already hit with fear. What is being done to ensure that those type of fear factors are being brought into control so that both parties can go home, or one can be arrested and then do the process for Mirandizing and understanding what they're being detained for?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's very interesting because it's unfortunate to me that if there's someone who will fight with an officer or to try and get away from an officer out of just fear, we have to be able to change that. And the only way we do that is by getting to know each other, right? The thing with the officer, and what I've been saying here is that level of fear should not be escalated because someone doesn't look like you. And so that's where we have to look at when we talk about the implicit bias training and the cultural competency, to get to know what different cultures and people that you are going to be coming in contact with out in our communities that you may not understand. Because you don't understand them as a police officer should not heighten your fear level. And I get that question a lot. So, well, if that person had been white, do you think the officer would have shot him? And my answer is I can't answer that because I'm not the officer, but what I can say is it's unfortunate if that officer who said I was in fear for my life, if that fear for your life was because you were encountering someone that didn't look like you, then you might be in the wrong profession. And so we have to make sure that officers are learning about the people that they're coming in contact with, and they have knowledge. It's not on that individual that we're making a traffic stop on to not be scared. It's on the officer to make sure that we're de-escalating that. So when those things happen, we have to be able to be in charge of that and to do everything we can. It's not going to work out perfectly all the time, but what I can tell you is, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, we average about 600,000 contacts with citizens every single year. We only average about 14,000 arrests, and even less than that end up in any type of force whatsoever, less than 1/2 of 1% or whatever you want to say, but very few have those experiences that we're talking about, but that's what's getting the attention and that's what's getting noticed. And so 97% of our calls never end up in an arrest, never end up in citations, never end up in anything controversial with our citizens. But when we have those contacts, they need to be ones that are positive as we can possibly make them.
Okay. And finally, my wife has this fear that when I leave the home, that I'm 5'10", I'm 300 pounds, I'm broad-shouldered, I'm dark-skinned. Get in my car, go to work, mistaken identity. Could be stopped, maybe thought to be someone else, or involved in the commission of crime without truly being identified. A police officer, out of fear, could injure me, shoot me with saying that could happen or don't want to happen without him knowing that I'm a father, I'm a husband, that I'm ordained clergy, or know that I have a good job. To me, it is the assessment and the triage, like I do in IT. I got to know what's going on before I declare an incident. So when she has that fear for me, it makes me more reluctant to even leave the house when I want to be able to enjoy the freedom that I have. And how do I handle that if I'm stopped by a police officer and I know that he is not trying to find out who I am, but all he sees is 5'10" 300 pounds, dark-skinned male, and I look like everyone else?
Yeah, you know, I'm not real sure how to answer that question because, you know, what I can tell you is if you look at media reports, if you look at the news and everything else, the perception would be that we shoot a lot of people. The perception is that we get into a lot of use of forces and we put a lot of people in the hospital. What reality is all of 2020, we had one officer-involved shooting where an officer discharged their firearm, and that was after an individual shot at the officer. So far this year, we've had one officer-involved shooting. That was when the officer shot twice at an officer. We've had officers shot at that we didn't return fire. So I understand perception, but the only way I can answer that is the reality here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. I think that we look at what's going on and what we've seen across the country. Across the country, there are over 6 million citizen contacts. We're looking at some that went bad from bad officers, that some that we look at that say these officers should never even have been police officers, and unfortunate situations. But what is disturbing on the law enforcement end from our perspective is that we get brushed with a broad stroke because of these incidents that happen all across the country. But when you really look at the numbers and you look at our encounters, it's not really what we're seeing now. I'm not saying that people don't have bad encounters and experiences with officers because, like I said, sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And sometimes officers can be rude. They can come across as very brash. And I've had experiences with officers that have been that way. So, but the fear of I'm going to get pulled over by an officer and get shot and killed, from my perspective and what I've seen and what I've dealt with, I'll never believe that's reality in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. So.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my questions. I only have about 25 questions for you, so just give me some time.
That's all? Come on.
That's all.
We can do
just
better
keeping it
than
nice and simple for you. So, Officer Jennings, first thing is, can you use the acronym SRO. Can you just explain what SRO means?
Oh, I'm sorry. SRO is School Resource Officers. Those are officers that are in the schools.
Okay,
assigned.
great. So I actually that was one of my three. It's only three.
All right. Yeah.
My second questions, I'll just go really quickly. But the first question really is around politicizing. There's a lot of politicizing going on. So if you think about it, we have, the Black Lives Matter movement that happened. And then after that, you saw a lot of, Blue Lives Matter things. And it was really, to me, meant to kind of polarize the, people and how we think about it. So my first part of my question is, how has the political environment hampered your ability to go ahead and move forward? And then do you want me to give you my second one, or?
Well, let me answer that because
Okay.
I'm very forgetful. So.
Okay.
So the movements to me have made it very challenging because I have responsibility of 2,500 employees. I have to be able to balance to make sure that they're serving our community in the most appropriate way possible. But at the same time, I have demands from the public and many activists, and some of those demands are really kind of far out there, such as we need to get rid of police. I'll never want to live in a society of chaos where there aren't any police officers. I just don't think that's a very wise recommendation. But at the same time, to be able to come together, and that's what I tell people, we don't have to agree, but we have to be able to come together at the table and have a discussion and talk. And I think that's what I've extended to both sides, both internally with my officers and also the relationship that I've been able to build with activists and some of the political figures that have been against the police for quite some time. And we talk, and it's funny how we can talk and we can laugh and we can joke, and at the same time we can disagree, and we can hang up the phone knowing that we disagree, and it's been very cordial.
Awesome, thank you for that. And this really is my last question is, if you had all the time, the money, and the resources in the world, I'm just curious, what is the one thing that you would do in your role to really help make a positive impact for Charlotte and our community?
Wow, I think that if I had all of those resources, it would be to somehow engage the community more into what we do as a police department. What I did today with the football team, I'd love to do that. I'd love to have an entire unit that did that every single day. That's all we did was host people, feed them, we bring them through training, and had a whole campus that we could do that. And so it's important that people get to know who we are. And when people get to know who we are, this is what's interesting, is when they get to know who we are and exceed experiences that we have, the biggest thing I hear is, I had no idea. I had no idea how tough these decisions are that you have to make. I had no idea how encounters can quickly escalate without you having any idea, having a clue that they're going in that direction. So when we can reach as many people that way, I think that understanding is better, and then it also allows for our officers to get to know the people that they're serving as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
I want to speak quickly on the SROs, for instance.
Yes.
I don't have a young kid in school,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering, are those officers armed, or are they there as just regular plainclothesmen, or are they wearing T-shirts, golf shirts? How are they interacting with the kids?
They're in full uniform, just like a regular uniformed officer. They should be, or the goal is that they interact with the kids in a positive manner.
Right.
Unfortunately, some of the schools some schools we have 2 SROs and school resource officers in there because I think some schools, they spend too much time enforcing the law because they have to. I've seen incidents where students have gotten in fights with teachers, or when students have brought weapons to school, things like that. And that's what's unfortunate, when the SROs spend more of their time engaging with these individuals and dealing with even after-school programs that they work with. They go to sporting events for these kids, and they get to know them, and they befriend them. And I think that's important, and that's the way to be successful as an SRO, and hopefully not dealing too much with violent activity in the schools, because we need to create a good learning environment without the distraction of any type of criminal activity and without the distraction of law enforcement. We want to have police out there to be able to talk with the kids and get to know them.
Okay, and you spoke on it about putting other folks in other roles versus the armed officer in the school. Is that something that's being considered, to put those kind of people in the schools with those officers possibly on standby versus having an armed officer in the school every day in front of those kids? Another quick question would be, I hear this qualified immunity. As a police chief, are you part of the union still, or are you part of the community now as a community officer?
Yeah. So first thing about the pairing is having somebody in there with the school resource. That's something that I know schools have different personnel, counselors, and everything else that are in there with them, and I know our SROs do work with them. you know, that's something that would be beyond something that I could do. That would be more of a county and the school system saying, we're going to put someone else in there that would help with some of the control of the schools when it comes to violent activity or something, disputes between some of the students and things like that. So now, the next question was qualified immunity. And this is, I think a lot of people don't quite understand what that means, or when they say that and they say we need to get rid of qualified immunity. The thing about, if I am a police officer and I violate someone's constitutional rights, or I commit a crime on duty, I have no immunity. I'm not, I think that when qualified immunity was put in place, it was to protect officers from frivolous lawsuits that have to now be heard in court. And we have those all the time. I think you can attest to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had an officer just, we have officers getting sued because they handcuffed somebody who had committed a crime, and they're saying that he put the handcuffs on too tight. And if we get rid of qualified immunity, we're going to be spending all of our time in the court system for those types of cases. What we do have right now in place is, if I violate a constitutional right, if I commit a crime, then all of that goes away anyway. So I don't see you might can speak even more
I
on
think that's a great one. I certainly want to unpack it. We don't have as much time, but that's an excellent question. Matter of fact, several people asked that question, so thank you, sir, for asking it. But I would say this: the key word of qualified immunity is that first word. You have to qualify for it if you think about it that way, right? And I can say I could testify. I'm like that person that just kind of stumbled into stuff. I got sued twice while I was in CMPD. One time the guy said I really worked for the CIA, and I was covering as a CMPD officer, and I was spying on him through his TV, and he filed a lawsuit. But because of that immunity that was in place, I didn't personally have to deal with it. My family was protected, but I do understand that how it can be perceived as a blanket to protect, misbehavior. So, but thank you for asking that, because several people did ask.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
good.
And your relationship with the unions.
Oh, thank you. Oh yeah. No, we don't have a union in North Carolina is a right-to-work state. We have a fraternal order of police, but they are not a union. They don't have the powers of a union.
And our sister, we will save you the best for last. And then y'all listen. I know it's 8 o'clock, but this is what I want to do. I want to save the last few minutes. Certainly, if anybody has to leave or anybody on social media has to leave, but the last few minutes I want to give to the chief, because the chief has an initiative. To my understanding, he's the first one to do this. So I'm also going to ask the media after we hear from this last question. All of your questions have been great. Media, if you could capture this moment when I ask the chief this question, because I certainly want to take this segment if we don't catch anything else, because I think we'll be, we want to be one of the first people to hear about the chief's response to police reform, his response to escalation, his response to all of this, and he has a plan for it. So I want to make sure we all hear it. But after you, ma'am.
Hi. I think this might be a good segue into that. We are a missions-minded church, and our missions team has been out in the Charlotte community and surrounding areas doing mission projects, distributing food in the community. And we've come across a lot of officers who have been coming to collect food for citizens within the community. And I know some people have utilized the 911 system to say they have an emergency and they're hungry. What can we as a church do to assist you all in reaching out to the community to help?
Yeah, great. So our community engagement team, and I don't know if you have direct contact with them, but that's exactly what they're there for, because they're our arm into the community for those who are in need, and things that we do for outreach for CMPD. But we, years ago when I joined the department, there was no such thing as a community engagement. There was no such thing as a unit for that. Officers were just, some officers did it out of the kindness of their heart, but there was no expectation. So if you first need to build that relationship with that team with the captain or the major in that unit, and then they have certain contacts. They have ways to be able to reach community that a lot of people don't, and they are able to identify those needs as well. So if they're coming to you and getting food, that's a resource that they're utilizing, and I'm glad to hear that, because there are a lot of good people and a lot of good organizations out there that just don't know how to get their message out or how to get their resources out to people. So thank you for that.
Thank you for encouraging that within them.
Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you. Chief, I'm going to turn the last few minutes over to you. And I think this is very important. And by all means, I'm going to give you, if you need 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 to explain it, this is very important to me. I saved the best for last. I was recently contacted by NBC/MSNBC, and they said, hey, we would like to talk to you because we're flying into town to talk to your police chief. I felt all special, y'all. Thought it was all about me. They didn't really want to talk to me. But they said, we want to talk to you after we talk to the police chief, because your police chief is doing something that nobody else in the nation is doing, and we don't have a clue as to what this is and how it's going to work. I knew exactly what they were talking about because I had read an article. Chief, everybody is trying to figure out this new policy, or maybe you'll explain it better, but they're trying to figure out what does it look like when you say that you're training your officers in the field of customer service. One of the articles said that you hired a consulting firm that specializes in training restaurant employees and hotel employees and things of that nature who have never worked with police departments before, to teach police officers how to treat people not so much as suspects or victims, but as customers. Now, when the NBC asked me about it, and I say, well, you know, I'm a fan of a chief, but I'm trying to figure out what that looks like, because I'm like, you know, if I go to Starbucks, chief, and my latte is not good, I can, you know, get on there and say on a scale of 1 to 10, they get a 2 today because it didn't have just enough sweetness in it, not enough cocoa. But what does that look like? So, I'm joking, but then I'm gonna turn it over and I'm gonna shut up and let you explain it. But what does that look like, sir? Were your cuffs too tight on the scale of 1 to 10? Was the air right on the ride to jail? I mean, seriously, what does that look like? The world wants to know, Chief, because you are the first one to do this, so much so that NBC flew down to see you, Chief. By the way, that's going to be on Thursday at 3 p.m. Please check that out. Chief, tell us what this is. The floor is yours, because one of the things is we will actually take this segment out, and I'll certainly share it with you. But you know, the community is going to hear what you're doing. So please feel free to share in your own way, and I'm not going to interrupt you at all.
Well, why shouldn't you have a good air conditioning on your way down to the jail, right? So,
okay, fair enough.
So listen, there's some sort of unfortunate circumstances with this, because it did get out before. I'm introducing this to our officers this Thursday, and it's very sensitive to me that a lot of this got out, and our officers were like, what in the world is this going on? We hadn't heard about this. I said, well, you weren't supposed to yet. So we're going to do an introduction to this Thursday with our officers. But let me just say this about it. When you go into a restaurant, when you go into a retail store, when you go to any type of thing that you're servicing, whatever it might be, you expect good customer service, right? You want to walk away with a feeling of a positive interaction with that person that you're in contact with. And I thought about this, and I know a lot of people say, well, we don't serve chicken sandwiches, but I thought about this as far as my experience with a Chick-fil-A. If you don't like Chick-fil-A, don't let me know, because I don't know who doesn't like Chick-fil-A. But when I go into Chick-fil-A, I always have foods consistent. The service is fantastic. The kids, when I walk away, I feel like I was valued for that interaction. When you go to Disney, everybody's friendly. Everybody's interaction with you makes you feel like, makes you feel a certain way, and leaves you with a good feeling. So I'm talking to our command staff, and one of our public information officers said, hey, I know the person that I have a contact with the person who trained Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, Disney, or help consult with that training. And so my thought process is, well, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I didn't want a cookie cutter law enforcement training that people have been doing all across the country. And I had no idea when I looked at this that no other police department across the country was doing it. Looking at it from a customized customer service approach. And all it is how do we improve the interactions that we come in contact with individuals? Like I said, 97% of our contacts with the public are not confrontational. They're not involving crime issues that we're taking someone to jail or a use of force. I heard one report talking about we deal with criminals. This customer service does not pertain to what we do. Sure it does. Sure it does. We don't, our interactions are not always with criminals. We have victims. We have people involved in car wrecks. We have witnesses that we talk to. We have contacts that we just get out with, whether we're in a walking beat or something else, that we interact with individuals on a regular basis. So I said, how do we improve on those experiences? Not that we don't do it. We have a lot of great officers. I get stuff all the time about, hey, this officer helped me change a tire. They were so nice. They were so polite. They were so friendly. But just like any other training, we have to put a focus on it. We have to make sure that we're intentional about it and that we measure officers based on their interactions. And we also have to be able to measure those interactions. So we're putting stuff in place to make sure that we're capturing those positive interactions with the citizens and see where we go from that point. So it's something absolutely different that was just one of those aha moments that I had. And I said, I think we can make this work. So the good thing about it is it's our program developed by us with consultation. So a lot of what I heard is, oh, we're bringing in this group that trained Disney to come train us. No, that's not the case. We created this training with their help, and that's what's important to me. But a lot more of this is going to come out Thursday. You guys are ahead of the game just a little bit, so but you're going to hear a lot more coming Thursday. There's a lot of coverage that's getting it, and trust me, I had no idea that it would get this much attention nationwide. I did a interview with a Japanese news outlet, and it's like their version of CNN. But it was interesting to see myself on TV with Japanese subtitles underneath in our officers. But we have a lot of officers doing a lot of great work. We need to celebrate that. We need to also use that as an example to other officers about this is what we're talking about when we talk about customer service. It's not something that we don't do, that we don't ever do, but it's something that we want to be focused and intentional on from this point. If those who were around during community policing, some of the pushback that we said, oh, community policing is not going to work back in the early 90s, and now all you hear about is community policing. That's what officers do. That's second nature for officers. That's the culture. The same thing that I want to do when it comes to revolutionizing the experience that you have with police officers. And until you do that, sir, what you had talked about, being afraid to be encountered with police officers and based on information you might have across the country, until we can do that and say, you know what, I've had multiple encounters with officers, not because I'm having a bad day, but because they have taken the time and effort to spend some time with me so that I can get to know them. and they didn't come to me on the worst possible day that I could have. If we can do that and reach as many people as we can, we're going to be successful in this, and we're going to build better relationships, and we're also going to have better support when it comes to some of the negative incidents that you might see. So that's my goal. That's what I wish for departments across the country, and I hope that this really takes off into something that's successful.
Hey, thank you, Chief. I know it was well thought out. I know that you are a man of faith, so I know that you probably even prayed about it as well. So I'm truly pulling for you, and certainly this seems to be a part of your response to the police reform. And certainly one of the things that we believe in ministry is sometimes you have to be the change that you want to see. So certainly we're supportive of the effort and the initiative, and look forward to seeing some great things. Everyone, can we just celebrate our chief for coming out and spending some time with us? Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you. All right. Reverend Johnson, if you could gab this for me. Listen, as a public servant, as a governmental official, our chief can't really accept a whole lot of gifts and stuff. Because they always want to be, impartial. For example, if he got to pull me over tonight or something. So I couldn't give you the Escalade and Navigator that I wanted to, Chief. Hey. But certainly we just wanted to give you something that we thought you may be able to enjoy. So we certainly appreciate you coming out, sir.
Wow,
thank you for hanging out with us. We promised to do our homework, which is to continue to be to work with our local division,
yes,
which will be Steele Creek, and then also North Tryon at the main location. And we're absolutely going to take advantage of that roll call opportunity, and we're absolutely going to be here. We certainly pledge to be here as well. I know sometimes clergy go out. I've been out in protest. So in the middle of those situations, we will be on that call list to be there to support you, Chief. So thank you. And I'll say this, and I'm going to ask Dr. Lynch to pray over you. I'll say this, Chief. I was fortunate enough to be asked by the City of Charlotte Human Resources when Chief Putney announced he was going to retire to be with a group of clergy, and they asked us, what should the next police chief look like? Because we're going to do a search across the nation. And I remember saying, I need somebody that understands the people, understands the community, somebody that's culturally relevant, but also understands tactics, because we do live in a mean and unfriendly world. And as much as we don't like to think about tactics to keep my children safe, keep my wife safe, I want somebody who understands tactics but can teach officers how to use those things. And I'm grateful that after searching the globe, the buck stopped right here.
Thank you so
we're
much.
thankful for you, Chief. Yes, sir. Dr. Lynch, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, we can pray over our police chief and pray over our officers and things of that nature. We appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like, comment, and share this as we continue to try to get to know our leaders. Dr. Lynch.
Our Father and our God, we call upon you now, thanking you for life, health, and strength. We thank you for this new day we've never seen before. As we come now, Lord, to the close of this day, thank you for the privilege to sit down with our police chief, to have this conversation, to have this community engagement and encounter. We pray for, first of all, for him as an individual.
Yes.
We ask that you would anoint him afresh, mind, body, and soul. We ask, dear God, that you would bless his home, his family, his extended family. Father, as we pray for him, not just in this moment, but ongoing, we pray for your Holy Spirit to walk with him, to guide him as he navigates through the decisions that come before him, often several at a time, often several on a day, that are life impacting. We pray, God, that you would keep his hand under your care. Keep his heart under your care. Keep his mind focused under your care. And then, Father, we continue to pray for safety, not just for our police chief, but for our officers and for our citizens as we continue to exist and coexist in this world, that your Holy Spirit would guide us and keep us. We ask these and all blessings in the matchless name of Jesus our Christ. We do pray. Amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. God bless you. More than welcome to greet the chief on your way out. Thank you once again. Have a great evening. Amen. We clear, Aaron?